let's talk about one of the things in unallotment that has been talked about is local government aid. So the money that goes to counties, municipalities, cities, and obviously that money is not distributed equally throughout the state. Interestingly, there was actually a report that came out yesterday, a couple days ago, by the Taxpayers Association that looked at areas that get local government aid, and what they said is they're spending on average 12% more in health benefits for their employees than cities and towns that don't get local government aid, which kind of goes to, I think, what the governor's comments have been around that to the local governments, that no, there's, you don't have to cut fire and police. There's other places. So what's going to be the fallout and the impact on the cities and the counties and the townships who potentially are going to lose a significant amount of money in this?
This is where I think the governor and the Republicans have really lost their way in effectively conveying local government aid cuts, what that means to local units of government. I think the governor and Republicans, and certainly including me, believe that LGA is a necessary part of our system to make up for less well-off areas property tax-wise. But the governor, and if you may recall early in his term, his first term, he and R.T. Ryback, Mayor of Minneapolis, had sort of a war on this about cutting police and fire. The reality is that the local units of government are not making the hard decisions that the state has to make. For example, in these economic times, last fall, the town I grew up in, New Brighton, that city council, part-time, they get $50 a month, I know because my mother was the first person to serve on it in the 1970s. They voted themselves full health care benefits for themselves and their families. What does that cost? What are they thinking? I guess the point I try to shop among local units of government and to groups like the League of Minnesota Cities who represent them is do the tough love internally. If there are cities that are not being responsible, you're all taking the hit, and it's irresponsible for some cities to be budgeting responsibly, and it's at the same time while other cities are not, and then running to the Capitol and whining about the governor.
I think you look at, and I don't think normal people, and none of us would be normal since we're here talking about this morning, understand what LGA really is. They understand that their streets get plowed, their streets feel safe, their fire department's ready to go, and I think there is this kind of disparity in city services and in county services. Full disclosure, the Association of Minnesota Counties is a client of mine, and they came to us last fall and said, here is a slate of things, of mandates, basically unfunded or overfunded mandates from the state government that we want lifted. We know we're going to take a whack in the next session, but when you talk about human service directors and libraries, you don't disagree that these counties need to be delivering these services, but those are places both in mental health care and in libraries where it was called the maintenance of effort. You could never lower the amount you spent if you had bonded to a certain level there. So you could have decreasing population in some of these counties, but you had to maintain the same amount of spending for libraries and mental health services as two examples. The other one was that counties were being forced to take state prisoners to county jails and lose money on them on a day-by-day basis. Now, the counties came forward with ideas. I think the cities have been a little short on ideas like that and rather kind of protect their own interests. But again, I don't think most people understand LGA. I think that it will be, they have to rebrand it, to use a marketing term. People need to understand it better. And ultimately, I think it's going to be all about, we're used to good government at the local level, at the county level, and at the state level. And that's where the compelling discussion will continue to go, for the next 2 years.
Looking at the last couple days, so the governor makes the announcement, we're going home regardless, and then there was a flurry of activity. There, what was a very transparent, I guess, negotiation process this year, which was a little strange. Actually, let's stop there. I think that's interesting. Greg, this year there was kind of in the House, and I think Margaret Anderson Kelleher really pushed this commission. I can't remember. What was it called again? That thing. Yeah, so.
We have a much different word for that commission at the Politics of Minnesota Capitol Report Office, but I can't say it.
That's the one I was thinking of. So,
starts with cluster.
So anyway.
It ends with bomb, I'm sure.
So, was that political, was that good? Were people, were people actually watching that? You know, the idea was to have this transparent public process, but other than us lobbyists and people who can't sleep at 2 in the morning, was anybody watching that?
You know, I was either privileged enough or tortured enough to have sat in the, in previous years, the negotiations with that the governor would have with legislative leaders when I worked for the speaker, the majority leader. And the governor would always use a term at the end of session, and he would say that, and he would name names. Typically it was Senator Poggemiller. He would say that we're going to go into our kabuki theater stage. And I still don't know if I know exactly what kabuki theater is, but it's a lot of action.
It's dark.
Yeah. It's not as dark as what Sarah said, but it's a lot of action. It's a lot of movement with no action, essentially. And I think that's what the Legislative Planning and Fiscal Policy Committee was all about. It was the posturing that goes on at the end of session. And you know, certainly there's going to be some of that. I understand that there's negotiations that go back and forth, and the sides have to, you know, carve out their territory and things like that. But it really does get back to the need to come up with a better system. And I still believe that had the DFL engaged in a different type of budget process, if they had done zero-based budgeting, even on a trial basis, even with one committee, that it would have strengthened their overall hand. They could have still come forward, I believe, with a stronger hand to say, here's why we really believe we need to raise taxes. We have taken this budget apart from ground zero and built it up. We've taken out the things that don't deserve funding. We've added in those that do. We've eliminated some programs. We've added a few more. I think in the realm of public opinion, it would have given them a much stronger hand with regard to the governor. Instead, they had to resort to things like the LC, PFP, or whatever it is, and we got to the kabuki theater stage.
Maybe we should explain, let's back up a second. Traditionally, in crafting budgets and major negotiations, it all happens in the governor's office. And I thought the Democrats were quite brilliant in invoking this, and I think it's been around for a while, this legislative commission on, and you know the word I want to use but can't. Anyway, so the idea was, rather than everybody have the governor call the meetings and have the legislators walk out of the governor's office, and then the visual for the cameras is the speaker and the majority leader standing outside the governor's office reporting on what happened in there, was to take that whole dynamic over back to the legislature and have this commission. And I am told by people on both sides of the aisle who serve in the commission, I mean, that's the commission that figured out how to make the economic stimulus money work, and by all reports, that worked really, really well. But, you know, you had the Democrats got what they wanted, that visual of the empty chair with Governor Pawlenty's name thing on it. So that's the history. I guess the other piece that's concerning to me about this session, and we have to get out of this box, is that there has to be a respect for people who are elected to what? And I still, to this day, do not understand how Democrats, granted Governor Pawlenty won by a plurality in both elections, but you know what? He won. Close only counts in horseshoes. And the idea that they could somehow hold anything hostage to the guy who's the chief executive officer of the state just never made rational sense to me. I understand the politics and the visuals for the cameras and everything else, but until that recognition happens, we're going to be stalling out.